Flight attendant yells at Chuck. The pilot walks out and freezes. The plane was somewhere over Colorado when the yelling started. It wasn't turbulence. It wasn't the engines. It was a voice. Sharp, loud, authority laced with fear. "Sir," I said, "sit down. You do not ignore a direct command on this flight." Passengers turned their heads, some subtly, some with open curiosity. A few phones came out, not quite recording, but hovering in readiness. C-14A sat still. A man, mid-60s, weathered denim jacket, calm eyes, quiet. Chuck Norris. The flight attendant loomed over him, red vest tight at the seams, face flushed with a mixture of pressure and frustration. "I don't care who you think you are, sir. FAA rules apply to everyone. And you can't stand back here near the galley during descent." Chuck didn't speak, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't need to. He simply looked at her, not defiant, not smug, just a gaze that didn't waver and didn't apologize. That made her more nervous than if he'd raised his voice. "Sir," she repeated, louder now. "Take your seat now, or I'll call the captain." Still, Chuck said nothing. He stepped slightly to the side, back toward the emergency exit row, not near the galley, not blocking anything, just quietly removing himself from proximity. "That's not your assigned seat." No answer. He sat, slowly, crossed his arms. The man beside him, early 20s, earbuds in, tattoo of a snake around his wrist, pulled one earbud out and blinked. "You okay, sir?" Chuck gave a slight nod. The attendant turned, stormed to the front, and within 30 seconds, the cabin door opened. Not the external one, but the cockpit. Out stepped the pilot. Tall, mid-50s, neat hair, golden epaulets gleaming. He looked calm, until his eyes fell on 14A. And then, he froze, dead in his tracks. The cabin, already quiet, dropped to dead silence. Even the hum of the engines felt distant. The pilot's mouth parted slightly, but no words came. Then he said, almost too softly, "You're him." Chuck looked up. Their eyes met. Recognition passed like a lightning strike. The other passengers were now fully invested. Phones were definitely out. Someone whispered, "Is that Chuck Norris?" Another, "No way. He wouldn't fly commercial." A third, "He doesn't need a plane. He walks through the sky." Someone chuckled, but the laughter died quickly, because what had started as a routine altercation had now shifted. The man being yelled at? He wasn't just anyone. He was the storm the plane had no warning for. The flight attendant returned, flanked by another crew member. "Captain, this is the passenger refusing to cooperate. I've asked him twice to return to his seat." The captain didn't respond to her. He stepped closer to Chuck. Not aggressive, not even confrontational, just careful. "Mr. Norris, sir, if we'd known." "You didn't," Chuck said. His first words, calm, measured, steel wrapped in velvet. The pilot nodded once. "Is everything all right?" It was Chuck said. "And now?" Chuck looked out the window. "That depends." "On what?" "Whether this plane is still headed where it said it was going." No one understood what he meant, but the pilot did. His face paled. He turned to the attendant. "We're going to need to speak privately." "But now." They stepped to the front. The cabin buzzed. Low murmurs. Speculation. And Chuck just sat back, arms crossed, eyes closed. Not sleeping, just listening. The man next to him leaned slightly. "Sorry, but are you really?" Chuck opened one eye. "I'm just flying." "But why coach?" "Same air up here." 5 minutes passed. The pilot returned, addressed the cabin with a forced smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We'll be beginning final descent shortly." He looked at Chuck again, this time with something close to respect or fear. Then he turned and walked back into the cockpit. The attendant never came back to 14A. Chuck didn't move, didn't speak, but everyone around him had. With phones, with whispers, and with something else. A feeling that the rules had just changed. Back in the cockpit, the captain radioed quietly. "Control, this is Flight 2875. Be advised, possible high-profile passenger on board." "Copy." "Is there a security issue?" "No, but you might want to flag this landing." As the plane descended through the clouds, the flight was silent. No crying babies, no chatty rows, just a collective, buzzing awareness that they were sharing a flight with someone who didn't need threats to take control. Touchdown was smooth. The seatbelt signs dinged off. Everyone stood, but no one moved toward Chuck. He stood slowly, grabbed no bag, and walked down the aisle with the calm of a man who never needed to explain himself. People parted, naturally, instinctively. The attendant at the front watched him pass, her eyes uncertain, but wide with recognition now. Chuck paused at the door, looked at her once. Not angry, not smiling, just steady, then said, "Don't yell at people before you know who they are," and walked out. As he stepped into the terminal, two men in suits were already waiting. One held out a photo, not of Chuck, but of someone else, a man in a flight uniform. The caption, "Missing 48 hours. Last seen boarding this airline." Chuck looked at it, then looked back at the plane behind him. Guess I was on the right flight, after all. The terminal was a blur of motion. Rolling luggage, airport announcements, security patrols, pacing with practiced rhythm. But none of that moved Chuck. He stood still, holding the photo handed to him moments earlier by the two suited men. It was grainy, but clear enough. A man, maybe in his early 40s, wearing a crisp commercial airline uniform. Smile faint, eyes tired. Below the image, Captain David Reeves. Missing 48 hours. Last seen boarding this airline. Chuck narrowed his eyes, not because of what the image showed, but because of what it didn't. The background in the photo, it was the exact same boarding gate he'd just stepped through. "Where'd you get this?" he asked the taller man. "You're not the only one who asks questions, Mr. Norris. And you're not answering any." The shorter one stepped forward. "We're with Homeland Aviation Investigations. Quiet Division. This didn't hit the news yet." "Why me?" "Because 5 minutes after you boarded Flight 2875, the pilot changed." Chuck looked down the corridor toward baggage claim. "The man who flew us in wasn't supposed to." "Correct." The agent nodded. "Captain Reeves was scheduled. Manifest confirmed he was on board. But by the time the plane took off, someone else was in the seat. And the airline didn't notify anyone. They said it was a misprint. But you don't believe that." "No," the agent said. "And neither should you." Chuck handed back the photo. "Where's Reeves now?" "If we knew," the taller one said, "we wouldn't be waiting here." "Then start walking," Chuck said. "I'm not going to stand around while someone vanishes mid-flight." He turned and began walking, not toward the exit, but back into the terminal. The agents followed. Chuck's first stop wasn't security. It was gate 37. He walked up to the same counter where the flight had boarded that morning. A different attendant now, younger, chewing gum and scrolling her phone. "Excuse me," Chuck said, voice calm but commanding. She looked up. "Yeah. Flight 2875. This morning. I need to know who was on the original crew manifest." "I'm not supposed to." He handed her a badge. Not his. One of the agents had slipped it to him earlier. It had a seal on it that made her blink twice and straighten up. I can check." She tapped into her screen. Scrolled. Froze. It says Captain Reeves, but also says Captain Harmon Fluid. "So, 2 pilots listed?" "Yeah, but that's not normal." "Show me their logins." She hesitated. Chuck didn't blink. She turned the screen slightly. There they were. Reeves, logged in at 5:41 a.m. Harmon, override access logged at 5:58 a.m. "Someone overrode him," Chuck said quietly. The agents looked at each other. "That's internal tampering." "Could be worse," Chuck added. "Could be a swap." "Meaning?" "Reeves might have never made it to the cockpit." Chuck stepped back, thought for a moment, then asked, "Who checked the crew in?" It took them 20 minutes to find her, a woman in her 50s, tired eyes, hair pulled into a bun, wearing a navy blue ground crew jacket. Her name tag read Tess. Chuck approached gently. "Tess, you remember Captain Reeves this morning?" "Sure do," she said. "Nice guy. Quiet. Had his usual thermos. But, he got a call right before boarding. Stepped aside, looked tense, and then I went back to help him with baggage weights. When I looked up, he was gone. Gone. Just gone." Chuck looked at the agents. "Pull the CCTV from gate 37. Already requested." TSA's dragging their feet. "Then we knock." Within the hour, they were inside the TSA operations hub. Chuck didn't flash a badge this time. He just stood there, silent, still, until the supervisor looked up and saw him. Is that? Chuck nodded once. We need the tape. No one argued. The video played. At 5:42 a.m., Captain Reeves appeared, smiled at Tess, held his thermos. At 5:44, a call on his personal cell. He stepped to the wall, pressed it to his ear. At 5:47, a black-suited figure approached. No name badge, no airline uniform. Spoke for 30 seconds. Reeves shook his head. The man reached into his coat, handed over a small object. Reeves pocketed it and walked toward the service stairs. He never returned. Chuck leaned in. Freeze. Zoom. The object being handed over, it looked like a flash drive. Or a card. Either way, not standard protocol. You run facial on that guy? Chuck asked. The TSA agent nodded. Came back flagged. Name's Lucas Nevers. Former federal contractor. Last known employment, groundside intel logistics. Translation, guy who makes people disappear and makes it look legal. Chuck stood back, folded his arms. So Reeves is off the plane. Harmon steps in. Nobody blinks, which means either Harmon's in on it. We're scared to say he isn't. Chuck finished. Outside, the sun was dipping. Chuck stood at the top level of the parking garage, looking out over the runways. Why Reeves? He muttered. Why this flight? One of the agents stepped beside him. There's something else, he said. Reeves filed an anonymous report 3 days ago. Internal whistleblower channel. Said a federal air route had been hijacked for undocumented cargo movement. Said it involved airline staff. And then he boards a flight and disappears, Chuck said. Exactly. Chuck's eyes narrowed. And they made the mistake of putting me on the same flight. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Harmon didn't know. But someone in the cabin did. The crew. No, not the crew. He paused. Looked out. The person who started yelling. The one who tried to make me sit down before the plane even reached altitude. The flight attendant? Chuck nodded. She knew who I was. And she panicked. Chuck pulled out a card from his pocket. One of the airline's laminated emergency contact slips. He flipped it over. Written in Sharpie. You weren't supposed to be on this flight. Chuck stared at the writing. Then whispered. Let's find out who made that mistake. Chuck stood at the edge of the airport's long-term parking structure, holding the note. You weren't supposed to be on this flight. 7 words. One mistake. Their mistake. He tucked the card back into his jacket and turned toward the terminal. His boots echoed down the concrete as the agents caught up behind him. We pulled the crew list, the taller one said. Flight attendant's name is Madison Carver. 8 years with the airline. Clean record. Too clean, Chuck muttered. She's scheduled again tomorrow. Red-eye to Seattle. Chuck nodded. Then we book a seat. That night, Chuck didn't sleep. He watched. In the dim hotel room across from the terminal, he sat in a chair facing the window, eyes locked on Gate 41, where tomorrow's flight would depart. He wasn't waiting for the plane. He was waiting for the next mistake. At 3 a.m., a shadow moved. A figure in a black hoodie entered through a side gate, bypassing security, swiping a badge across the side reader near crew access. Chuck stood. They're still moving, he said into the burner phone the agents gave him. Stay back, one of them said. Not happening. Chuck moved fast. Down the stairs. Across the skybridge. Quiet as fog rolling in. He caught the figure 2 levels below, slipping into the maintenance corridor behind baggage screening. He followed. The lights flickered. The corridor narrowed. And, at the far end, a storage room door clicked shut. Chuck didn't knock. He kicked. The door slammed open. Inside, crates, equipment, airline uniforms, a wall of security vests. And in the center, 2 men and a woman. One of them, Madison Carver. She spun toward him, wide-eyed, caught in mid-conversation. The man beside her reached for something under the table. Chuck was faster. One sharp movement, and the table flipped. The weapon, a small subcompact pistol, skidded across the floor. I'm not here to talk, Chuck said coldly. I'm here for the truth. You don't know what you're messing with, the man barked. You're right, Chuck said, because I thought I was just flying to Denver. Madison stepped forward. You shouldn't have been on that flight. Why? Because we were moving something, she said. Her voice broke slightly. Not from guilt, from pressure. You people think this is about passengers, about coffee and seatbelts, but the real money moves under the floorboards. Chuck's eyes narrowed. You used a commercial plane for black transfers. Military tech. Biometrics. Disguised as cargo. All marked humanitarian. And Captain Reeves found out. She nodded. He threatened to report it. We were told not to let him fly. So what happened to him? The man to her left laughed bitterly. He's probably in the same hole they toss all the other idealists. Chuck stepped closer. Where? No answer. Just defiance. Until Chuck picked up the pistol and dismantled it. One-handed, in less than 5 seconds. Then he handed it back to the man. Now tell me where Reeves is. The man blinked. Then broke. There's a holding facility. Off-site. Decommissioned military range 20 miles out. Chuck turned to Madison. You're coming with me. You don't have jurisdiction. I don't need it. 20 minutes later, a black SUV tore down a back road surrounded by pines and fences topped with rusted coils. Inside, Chuck, Madison, and the 2 agents. The agent in the back whispered, "This is beyond airline security now. If they're moving military tech through civil flights." Chuck cut him off. "Then we're not dealing with smugglers. We're dealing with insiders." They reached the gate. Abandoned. Chain-locked. Half a warning sign still hanging. Chuck stepped out. No hesitation. He gripped the chain, pulled, and snapped the lock with a single twist from a tire iron in the back seat. "I've had worse doors," he muttered. Inside, the buildings were half buried in dust and ivy. But the facility wasn't empty. A surveillance camera above the door panned toward them. "They know we're here," the agent said. "Good," Chuck replied. "Let them try to stop me." Inside, the air was cold. Too cold. Artificial. That meant servers. Systems. Surveillance. They were still using it. Down 2 levels, past empty armories and training rooms, they found the vault. A red keypad blinked. Chuck turned to Madison. "Code." "I don't know it." He didn't need it. He shoved the emergency latch panel aside, exposed the wires, and began reconnecting in sequence. The light turned green. Inside the vault, 6 holding rooms. All empty, except one. Inside, Captain Reeves. Bruised. Alive. Barely conscious, but alive. He looked up slowly, blinking against the light. "Took you long enough," he whispered. Chuck stepped inside. "I had a layover." The agents radioed for extraction. Chuck helped Reeves out, gently, one arm slung over his shoulder. "They were going to move me tonight," Reeves muttered. "Dummy in a different name. New passport. New life. I wasn't going to see my wife again." "You still might," Chuck said. "But first, you're going to help end this." Back at the airport, Chuck watched the sun rise through the glass of the terminal. Reeves was safe. The vault was secured, and the names of everyone involved were already being transmitted. The agents handed Chuck a folder. "We're launching a national inquiry." "Make it loud," Chuck said. "People need to hear this." As Chuck walked away, his burner phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. "You saved one pilot, but we own the skies." He stared at the text, then looked up. Planes flew overhead, one after another, and Chuck whispered, "Then I guess I'll have to take the sky back, too." The story broke overnight. Missing pilot found alive in military facility. Chuck Norris involved. By morning, it was on every major news outlet. By noon, a senator was calling for an emergency hearing. And by the time Chuck stepped into the sunlight outside the federal building, the world had already chosen sides. Reporters gathered outside. Flashes popped. Microphones were raised. "Mr. Norris, did you know the pilot personally? Is this part of a larger conspiracy? Do you believe there are others being held?" Chuck paused at the stairs, looked out at the crowd. "You're asking the wrong questions," he said. "Don't ask why I found him. Ask why you didn't." And he walked away. The agents briefed him as they headed to a secure location. The airline? Silent. The crew? Lawyering up. But the data pulled from the storage facility had cracked everything open. Covert manifests. Unauthorized clearances. Dozens of flights rerouted under false FAA codes. This was organized, one agent said. Not a one-off. Not a rogue element. Chuck nodded. They've been doing this for years. Then why risk Reeves? Because he was going to break the silence, Chuck replied. And silence is the only thing holding their system together. Chuck returned to the terminal. Not to fly, but to observe. And there, seated near gate 22, was someone he recognized. The man who replaced Reeves on the flight. Captain Harmon. Alone. Reading. Or pretending to. Chuck approached. Quiet. Direct. Harmon looked up, startled. You shouldn't be here. Neither should you, Chuck replied. They made me fly it, Harmon said. They said I'd lose everything. I didn't know what was in the cargo. But you knew Reeves wasn't supposed to disappear. Silence. I didn't ask questions, Harmon whispered. That's the problem, Chuck said. Nobody ever does. At a nearby gate, an overhead announcement called boarding. Passengers moved in waves. Normal. Too normal. Chuck scanned the crowd. And there, near the entrance to the jetway, he saw her. Madison Carver, the flight attendant. Not arrested. Not detained. Wearing her uniform. Smiling. She's flying again? Chuck muttered. The agent beside him nodded grimly. Lawyered up. Out on bail. Company put her back on active duty. What flight? Overseas. No public manifest. Chuck's jaw tightened. They're still moving something. He didn't wait. He moved. Pushed past security. Straight toward the gate. The TSA officer tried to stop him. Chuck flashed a badge, this time a silver-plated U.S. Marshal badge, dated and real. A relic from another life. Sir, the officer began. I'm reclaiming jurisdiction. And with that, he stepped onto the jetway. Inside the plane, Madison turned mid-prep. Saw him. Froze. You can't be here, she hissed. This is a sealed boarding. Not anymore. Chuck opened the service panel beside the crew storage. Inside, untagged cargo. No scans. Just containers marked medical aid. He cracked one open. Inside, steel, wires, military tech, labeled property of Echelon Logistics, confidential. Still humanitarian? Chuck asked quietly. By the time airport security reached the plane, Chuck had already removed 3 containers and placed them on the tarmac. The agents backed him. The press arrived before the cleanup crew could. Chuck stood in the frame of the plane's doorway, holding the final container. They said I was a passenger, he called down. Turns out, I was the only one on board who wasn't being used. The media exploded. Senators demanded hearings. The CEO of the airline issued a vague statement about internal reviews. And the president of Echelon Logistics? He vanished. Off-grid. No press. No appearance. No explanation. Later that day, the agents debriefed Chuck again. You've pulled the whole curtain off. I didn't pull it, Chuck replied. I just made them stop hiding behind it. What do we do now? Keep it loud, he said. Noise is the only thing they can't erase. That night, Chuck received a call. No ID. A voice filtered. You're interfering with national logistics. I'm interfering with corruption. We're not the bad guys, Mr. Norris. Then why are you hiding? Silence. Then the voice added, This is bigger than you. I'm not trying to be big, Chuck said. Just loud enough to wake the people who are. As Chuck walked through the terminal one last time, a small child bumped into him. Apologized. Chuck knelt to help him with a dropped toy. Tucked in the child's sleeve, a folded paper. Chuck opened it. Inside, a flight number. A time, a scribbled message. We're not done. Chuck stood slowly, looked toward the departure boards, and said, Neither am I. Chuck was used to being watched, but this was different. After the discovery on the tarmac, after the headlines and the interviews and the whistleblowers who suddenly found their courage, something shifted. The air got colder. The silence around him got heavier. The agents who once followed his lead were now quieter on the phone. The press that chased his steps? Suddenly preoccupied with other stories. The airline issued a new statement, this one carefully worded. There is no evidence that any wrongdoing occurred on board Flight 2875. Chuck read it 3 times. Each sentence a twist of the truth. It was a warning dressed as a press release. That afternoon, his credit cards froze. His travel profile on the airline's system? Gone. Hotels that once handed over keys now didn't have a reservation. At a diner off a rural highway, a waitress leaned in with a shaky hand and whispered, They told us not to serve you. Said you were flagged. The system wasn't going to kill him. It was going to erase him. Back in a cheap motel room, Chuck sat by the window, watching the parking lot. Every car, every shadow, every flicker. They hadn't come in force. They didn't need to. All they had to do was cut him off from the world, isolate him until the story faded. But what they didn't understand was this. Chuck Norris doesn't need the world to move. He moves through it. That night, someone knocked on his door. Once. Twice. Chuck stood slowly. Didn't speak. Didn't reach for a weapon. Just opened the door. A woman stood there. Early 30s. Messy hair. Red eyes. "I knew you wouldn't leave," she said. Chuck didn't recognize her. Not immediately. "I'm Reeves' wife." Now he did. "They told me he was dead," she whispered. "But I saw you on the news. I knew, I had to see it for myself." Chuck nodded. "He's alive. He fought to be. Then I want to fight too." She handed him a drive. He made backups, in case they came for him. Chuck took it. "This changes everything," she said. "That's what they're afraid of," Chuck answered. The drive wasn't just data. It was evidence. Flight plans. Encrypted manifests. Names. Private airstrips being used to reroute cargo from government facilities, using public planes as shields. It was bigger than anyone thought. Bigger than Reeves. Bigger than Chuck. He took it to Dana, the reporter who'd first followed him in Grayston. She met him in the back of an abandoned service station. "If I run this," she said, "they'll come for me. They already are. I need more than files. I need someone on record." Chuck nodded. "You'll have it." "You." "Not me," he said. "Him." That night, Captain Reeves appeared on livestream. His voice shaky, but strong. He named names, told stories, explained how entire departments had looked the other way, because it was easier than asking why. Chuck sat off camera, watching, waiting, knowing a strike would come. And it did. 3 hours later, black SUVs rolled past his motel. No lights, no sirens. They stopped and waited. Chuck didn't run. He walked straight out the front door, stood in the yellow pool of light under the buzzing sign. One of the doors opened. A man in a suit stepped out. Gray hair, blank face. "We need you to come with us. You've got nothing to hold me on. This isn't an arrest. It's a conversation." "You don't talk," Chuck said. "You threaten." "We don't need to. The world will forget soon. Not if I make it louder." He walked forward calmly, stopped inches from the man. "You can take my name off hotel logs. Cut my cards. Turn off the cameras. But you can't stop truth from landing." "You really think you can fix this?" the man asked. "No," Chuck said, "but I can make sure you don't sleep while it breaks." The man backed away. Didn't speak again. Didn't need to. They left. And Chuck remained. By morning, the public pressure was back. Reeves' video had gone viral. Pilots across the country began striking. Airline stocks dipped. A formal investigation was launched. And Chuck, he stood in the center of it all, not behind a podium, just visible enough for people to see the one man who didn't back down. Chuck received a message. No name, just a single photo, a private runway in the desert, a red flag with no insignia. Beneath it, a name scrawled in marker. "Final stop. No passengers return." Chuck stared at it and said quietly, "Then I guess I'm boarding one more flight." The airstrip was nowhere. No road signs, no gate, no control tower, just a stretch of desert cracked by heat and silence. Chuck arrived at dusk. The wind kicked dust across the cracked asphalt. In the distance, one hangar, one jet, unmarked. The plane was matte black, civilian-sized, but built like a military ghost. No logos, no windows at the rear. The kind of aircraft that didn't show up on radars or in conversations. This was the place. The final stop. Chuck wasn't supposed to be on this flight. That much was clear. But then again, he'd never asked permission. He watched from the ridge above the runway, binoculars in one hand, a silent phone in the other. No texts, no updates. The agents had gone dark, either shut down or scared off. That was fine. Chuck didn't need backup. He just needed timing. At 20:08, the first truck arrived. 2 men got out, security types. Not TSA, not federal, private, ruthless. They unloaded 3 crates marked soil equipment. Chuck zoomed in. "No farming gear weighs that much," he muttered. 5 minutes later, another van pulled up. This time, passengers. 4 of them, blindfolded, hands zip-tied, moved fast, quietly. Chuck's jaw clenched. They weren't prisoners. They were witnesses. Or worse, whistleblowers never given the chance. He descended the hill like a shadow. sticking to the ridge, cutting through dry brush, crossing behind the hangar. At the edge of the tarmac, he waited. He let them finish their loading. He watched the pilot walk up the rear ramp, clipboard in hand. Then he moved. No one saw him enter. No alarms tripped. The back cargo hold was stacked tight, crates, bags, cases locked with digital seals. He found cover behind a thick steel container and crouched. Waited. Listened. The door closed. The engines hummed to life. The plane began to taxi. Chuck didn't flinch. He was on a flight now, and the sky would have to deal with it. 30 minutes later, they were airborne. Altitude, 41,000 feet. Destination, unknown. There were no safety announcements. No fasten seatbelt signs. This wasn't a commercial flight. This was a ghost route. Chuck moved forward, silent. Each compartment revealed more than the last. A section of seats, empty except for one man. Head bowed, breathing shallow. Chuck recognized him. One of the names from Reeves' list. Another pilot who vanished 2 months ago. He was alive, sedated, strapped in. Chuck checked the forebag, labeled hydration therapy. But the liquid wasn't saline. It was something else. Experimental. Illegal. Chuck disconnected it, lifted the man gently, laying him flat, keeping pressure off his spine. He moved forward again. The cockpit was locked. Standard. Chuck didn't knock. He pried open the hatch with a pressure release tool tucked in his boot. Inside, 2 pilots. The one on the left froze when he saw him. The one on the right reached for a switch. Chuck moved first. One hand on the yoke, the other on the pilot's wrist. I wouldn't, he said calmly, unless you want this flight to end early. The second pilot raised his hand slowly. We didn't know. You never do, Chuck said. You just fly where they tell you. Where are we going? He asked. Landing strip in the Andes. No manifest. No landing codes. What's the cargo? The pilot hesitated. Chuck stared. He cracked. Bio-tracking tech. Movement sensors. DNA recorders. Human monitoring gear. Being flown where? To a compound. Privately owned. They test there. Chuck's voice dropped to ice. You've flown others, haven't you? I just fly the plane. Chuck nodded. Not anymore. He pulled the flight stick hard. The plane dipped just slightly, enough to throw everything off balance. In the back, alarms sounded. In the cockpit, panic rose. Chuck leveled the plane again, barely. We're turning around. You don't have the coordinates. You'll guide me, Chuck said. Or this plane finds a mountain instead. They rerouted over the Gulf. Chuck kept the pilots under control. And one by one, the passengers in the back, those who weren't sedated, began to stir. Fear, confusion, and then relief when they saw him. Are we being saved? One whispered. No, Chuck said. You're waking up. He landed the plane himself, on a strip outside Houston. Emergency responders were already waiting. Thanks to a coded message he'd sent midair through a hidden military channel only a few knew still existed. The flight was met by agents in full tactical gear, the kind who didn't ask questions. Chuck stepped out first. One of them recognized him. You really flew that thing? With a little help, Chuck said. Where'd you learn that? A long time ago, in places we don't talk about. The passengers were taken into protective custody. The cargo? Seized. The pilots? Detained. And the story? Just getting started. Back at the tarmac, Chuck found a sealed envelope in the cockpit, addressed to no one. He opened it. Inside, a photo, not of him, of a boy, 10 years old, smiling, standing in front of the very same unmarked plane. Written on the back, he never got off. Chuck stared at it. The wind kicked up, dust across the strip. And for the first time in a long time, Chuck felt rage. Real, sharp, controlled. Then I'm not done flying, he muttered. Washington, D.C., 8:02 a.m. The Capitol steps buzzed with media. Cameras, cables, anchors rehearsing scripts they'd only just been cleared to read. Inside, a special subcommittee hearing was minutes away from beginning, and seated silently in the back row, flanked by 2 U.S. Marshals, Chuck Norris. He wasn't invited, but he wasn't turned away either. The room felt tight, like air held in a jar, waiting to burst. To his left, Captain Reeves sat straight, still pale but alive. To his right, Dana, her notepad balanced on one knee, jaw tight. At the front, a polished table lined with microphones. And across from it, Echelon Logistics. 3 executives. Ties perfect, faces blank. Behind them, lawyers, assistants. Power on parade. The chairman tapped the gavel. We're here to address the unauthorized transport of military technology, the disappearance of government employees, and the use of public air travel for covert operations. Mr. Vaughn, you may begin. The lead executive cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, these accusations are built on speculation and hearsay. Chuck didn't flinch, but Dana whispered, "Here we go. We are a logistics company. We handle government contracts legally. All manifests were signed, all inspections cleared, including Flight 2875, asked the chairman. That incident was due to clerical error. We've addressed the matter internally. And the pilot who disappeared? An unrelated personnel issue." Chuck's fingers tapped once on his seat rest. Soft, rhythmic. Reeves noticed. It meant he was getting ready to speak. The chairman turned. "Mr. Reeves, would you like to respond?" Reeves stood slowly, hands on the edge of the table. His voice shook at first, then steadied. "I filed a report 3 days before my flight. It went ignored. I boarded, and within 10 minutes, was taken by force. I was drugged, restrained, and held in an off-grid site for 4 days. I saw other pilots, some who haven't been seen since." The room murmured. Chuck sat motionless. "They used my credentials," Reeves continued, "to move cargo that was never scanned, never documented. When I tried to speak up, they made me disappear." The chairman looked at the executives. "Care to revise your earlier statement?" One of them leaned in to whisper to the lead. Vaughn looked nervous now. "This is deeply concerning. If true, it represents a failure of subcontracted oversight." Chuck stood, quietly, and everyone turned. He didn't walk to the microphone. He walked past it, straight to the front table. 2 agents started to move. The chairman waved them down. Chuck placed something on the table. The photo. The boy, smiling in front of the unmarked jet. He flipped it. Read the words aloud. He never got off. He turned to the panel. "This boy is one of 6 confirmed minors transported by your logistics company. One of them was confirmed deceased overseas. One is missing. This one," he pointed to the photo, "he's your reckoning." The room froze. Chuck's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You had behind contracts. You used civilians. You tried to erase the trail with red tape and silence. I was a passenger. Now I'm your passenger list." Vaughn stammered. This is a violation of protocol." "No," Chuck said. "What you did was the violation. What I am is the consequence." Dana raised her phone. Recording. Reeves opened a folder and handed it to the chairman. Inside, every file, every manifest, every face. And then, the doors opened. Federal agents entered. No press tags, no suits, just badges. "Mr. Vaughn, gentlemen, you'll need to come with us." One lawyer started to speak, was cut off. The cuffs clicked louder than the cameras. Outside, the sun broke through cloud. Reporters shouted questions. "Chuck, did you plan this? How deep does it go? Will you testify again?" He walked down the steps slowly, stopped near the 3rd pillar, turned slightly toward the cameras. "It goes as deep as we let it. And today, we stopped digging graves." Later that evening, Chuck stood alone at Reagan Airport's overlooked deck. A plane took off, lights blinking, quiet in the sky. Dana joined him. "You just took down a multi-billion-dollar operation." "They took themselves down," Chuck said. "I just made it loud." "What now?" He didn't answer right away. "Then, now I find the rest." His phone buzzed. Unknown number. A video. Chuck hit play. Footage of dim room. Metal floor. 2 kids. Huddled. And a voice. He found one flight. Let's see if he can find the others. Chuck stared at the screen. Eyes narrowed. Then whispered, "I will." The video didn't leave Chuck's hands for 2 days. He watched it again and again. The shadows in the corners, the tone of the voice, the fear in the children's eyes. Not just fear of being taken, but fear of being forgotten. And that was the final switch. This wasn't about manifest codes or black market tech anymore. This was about lives, about dignity, and about what happens when no one speaks up. Chuck moved without fanfare. He didn't brief the agents, didn't call the press. He vanished from the headlines like he'd never been there, the same way he'd arrived. But he wasn't gone. He was preparing. 3 weeks later, a private security compound in Nevada shut down in the middle of the night. No sirens, no arrests, just a blackout and a broadcast. From an encrypted satellite feed, a video appeared across thousands of screens. Private feeds, airports, newsrooms, a live stream of Chuck Norris standing outside a warehouse. Beside him, 2 of the missing children, smiling, safe. He didn't name the facility, didn't show the logos. He didn't need to. The message was enough. They built this system hoping no one would ever pull the curtain, he said calmly. They counted on fear, on silence. But they forgot something. The only thing more powerful than fear is the truth, backed by people who refuse to look away. He turned the camera slightly, showing crates, IDs, documents. These kids aren't cargo. They're not lost. They're coming home. The feed cut, but the echo didn't. Within hours, the compound was raided. Within days, 7 more were identified. Within weeks, an international task force was formed. Not because governments were noble, but because now the world was watching. They had no choice. Chuck didn't testify again, didn't stand on stages. He returned to the diner in Grayston, ordered coffee, sat quietly. Lucy refilled his cup without asking. Busy year, she smiled. You could say that. You staying a while? Long enough. She smiled, walked off. Frank approached with a local paper. Front page. Dismantled. Private flight network exposed. Norris named unlikely guardian. He set it on the table. Chuck didn't look down. I liked it better when you were just the quiet guy in the corner, Frank muttered. So did I. They both smirked. Outside, a school bus rolled by. Kids waved. One had a toy, a small action figure, bearded, in a denim jacket. It waved, too. Chuck smiled just barely. But it was real. Epilogue. No one knows exactly where he went after that. Some say he lives off-grid, watching skies for flights that shouldn't be flying. Others say he visits airports at random, checking manifests like a quiet guardian. One thing's for sure. He's still out there. And if you see a man in row 14A, don't ask him to move. Ask him what he's watching for. Because if Chuck Norris is on your flight, you're safer than you know. The end.